You need to maintain your level of urgency when it comes to preparedness right now. We know that things are moving into a different phase, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it because of how long everything is taking. But there are a lot of things in the works right now that are going to move us into new territory that is eventually going to put us in a very bad situation. Things are going to be very difficult, and we have to be ready to pivot towards whatever strategy is going to be more beneficial for us here in the future. Understand that the food shortage is going to be utilized as a crisis in many ways that will push us towards things like universal basic income. It'll push us towards control of the masses, and there will be programs set up by the government where food will be subsidized, similarly to what they're doing in Iran right now, to where if you don't sign up for certain programs or possibly adhere to certain mandates, you won't have access to the subsidized food. People who are of low income and don't have the ability to afford food right now will likely be exploited and forced into these different programs in order to just put bread on the table. And unfortunately, that is what is going to be used as a tool to move everybody into this new type of society that they have been trying to push us towards over the last 2 years. Keep in mind that this food shortage is going to be wrapped up in a lot of different things that are going on right now. You have all the wheat exports that are being cut off, especially from countries like India, because obviously they want to maintain price controls in their own country and make sure that they don't face starvation level events. We also have the diesel shortage and the logistics issues that are going on with the supply chain that are limiting the amount of food that can actually be transported around the world, which then raises prices as well. And we have the conflict over in Eastern Europe that has decimated the overall wheat supply on a global scale. So food is getting more expensive, and governments are going to use this to their advantage in order to force people into programs where if they don't participate, they won't be able to afford to eat. And that is a huge part of what's happening here. You need to understand that as a prepper and somebody who wants to be self-reliant, you are trying to take yourself out of that equation and maintain your level of freedom by doing so. If you don't have to sign up for these programs, if you don't have to adhere to certain mandates in order to afford the food that you need to survive, then the government loses control over you. And that is a huge part of the problem that they see coming here in the future, which is why we're going to see more censorship. We're going to see more controls coming from the government, like their Ministry of Truth that they're trying to push out. And we're also going to see targeting of people like you and I who aren't necessarily going to adhere to these new programs, that they are going to label in certain ways in an extremist fashion to show us as being a possible threat to the future of humanity due to our voluntary exclusion from this new system. So we are entering dangerous times, and don't for a second downplay the threat that's happening overseas right now, which is what the mainstream media would have you do. If you were to look on any mainstream news page right now, you would seem to have this feeling that nothing bad is really going to happen and that things are cooling off and it's not really that big of a deal. But we know that with Sweden and Finland trying to join NATO, and with Russia basically saying if that was to happen, there would be strategic response because of said maneuvers, well, we know that this is a provocation, or I guess the actions of provocateurs, in the sense of Western society trying to push Russia to that limit that might make them do something more drastic. And the idea that people walk around daily life saying, well, nothing's going to happen because that's just too big of a problem and nobody's willing to go to that length is naive. People shouldn't just rely on that for their safety net just because of the fact that nobody would really do that, right? I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that this could be a possibility of some type of nuclear event in the future. And with nuclear weapons being moved to the Finnish border as we speak, and that all happening in the sense of a response to this NATO membership program that everybody's trying to suddenly jump on board with, we know that this situation is escalating and getting worse. So don't get all of your comforts from the mainstream media, because all that does is give you less preparedness. It gives you less motivation. It gives you less of an understanding as to where we really are standing right now in the sense of a threat level. And that is a problem, and that is dangerous in many, many ways. But let's be honest, the government knows they're going to be fine. They know they have places to go, they have places to run, they have the heads up that you and I are not going to receive, so they're not worried about whether or not you're prepared for what's coming. They're not worried about this provocation. They know that if they keep pushing the envelope and something happens, the people who are making these decisions aren't necessarily going to be directly affected by the outcome. You and I will be, but for them it'll be just fine. And like with what you're seeing over in Iran right now, because of protests erupting throughout the world, in that country especially, in regards to food prices and the lack of food in general, well, what's the response from the government? You have people that are basically resigning because they have no solutions, or you have these new systems where they're forcing you into a network or a program where you will have to be part of this machine in order to get your subsidized food. And you can see that happening here in the United States. You can see it happening everywhere else around the world. And that's why they don't care about you, because all that matters is that at some point in time, you're going to be part of that machine because they pushed you into it, whereas they won't have to be because they can afford market price regardless of what it is. So I wanted to make sure we had this conversation, give you something to consider, and just let you know that things aren't necessarily just going to improve. We're not in that scenario yet. When things do start to improve, I will be sure to let you know, but I just don't believe we're there right now. So we have to be vigilant, keep your situational awareness up. As desperation increases, we know people are going to be committing heinous acts more and more often because mental health is definitely at an all-time low here in the country, but it's all we can do. There's not much we can do to fix that at this point because those who made these decisions already pushed everybody to the brink. So what we can do is maintain our safety, keep up situational awareness, maintain your alertness as to what's going on around the rest of the world to give yourself as much of a heads up as possible in order to pivot and be strategic about these incoming events, and at the same time, live your life and still enjoy the things you enjoy while you can. Because honestly, things are going to get tighter and tighter. So while you can still have a good time, probably should. And that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.